Jewish Education in Media is pleased to present L'Chaim, a program that highlights the people, issues, and events of importance to the Jewish community. Now here is your host, Rabbi Mark Golub.
I'm Mark Golub, and in the aftermath of what's known as the Arab Spring, the turmoil in Egypt, with the overthrow first of Hosni Mubarak, only to be followed by the overthrow of Mohammed Morsi roughly 1 month after he was elected as a member of the Muslim Brotherhood. Egypt has been center stage among Middle East concerns. For the state of Israel and much of American Jewry, the question of how the chaos in Egypt will affect the somewhat fragile relations between Egypt and Israel, it's a major concern. And in America, there are those who are concerned about the direction Egypt's new government under acting President Adli Mansour, what direction will that take? And there are those in this country who are suggesting now that the United States cease its enormous foreign aid package to Egypt unless Egypt enact measures judged to be pro-American. Well, exactly what is going on in Egypt today, and what does it mean for Egypt's relationship with Israel and the United States and the West? For some insight, we're joined now by an award-winning Egyptian liberal human activist, Dalia Ziada, Executive Director of the Ibn Khaldun Center for Development Studies in Cairo, and a woman who for the last 2 years was named by Newsweek to be one of the world's most influential and most fearless women. And Dalia, what a pleasure it is to be sitting with you. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much, Mark. It's my pleasure.
Thank you. I want to make sure all the names are said properly for our audience. Say your name for me.
Dalia Ziada.
Okay. Say the name of your organization for me.
It's Ibn Khaldun Center for Development Studies.
What is that?
It's actually one of the oldest think tanks working in Egypt since 1980s. I'm so honored to be the executive director, given the fact that my age is almost the age of the center. It was first founded by a famous American Egyptian sociologist. His name is Sa'ad Ibrahim, and he's actually my mentor too. He was so brave to challenge the taboos in the Egyptian society and the Arab world and start speaking about democratization and human rights and civil freedoms long before anyone started in the region. So actually the role the center is playing now is trying to preserve the gains that we have achieved on the Arab Spring and make sure we don't turn it into an Arab winter or something like that.
Okay. Do you understand that for most Americans, you are a celebrity? We don't normally get to meet someone with your background and your perspective, and so for all of us, it's just so exciting, and I'm flattered that you have been able to find time to work me in and share yourself with our Shalom TV audience. That's very sweet of you.
Thank you so much. It's a big honor for me to be here with you. First of all, because of you personally, and second, because this is an opportunity for me too to give the right image and the right story about what's really happening there.
There is, you understand, so much misinformation and confusion from within the American perspective, and so I'm glad you're here to clarify some things. First of all, where were you when the Arab Spring first happened in December 2010? Where were you?
I was in Tahrir Square on January 25th. And even before that, actually, I was one of the people who somehow helped pave the way for this to happen. I learned here in the US about nonviolent action and strategies, and did some effort to translate the things that I've learned from people like Jane Sharp, Peter Ackerman on nonviolent action and strategies, and translate them into Arabic. One of the work to help my colleagues, of course, learn what I've learned then. One of the things I did and was given credit to afterwards by Newsweek and the Washington Post and some major news outlets is that I translated a comic book about Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement in the US. And ironically, this comic book was used by Martin Luther King himself in the 1950s and 1960s to mobilize people to join the civil rights movement. So I was actually honored to have this being translated into Arabic and train my friends and my colleagues in Egypt and in other places in the Middle East on how to use those tactics to make social change happen.
You studied in the United States?
Yes, I studied at Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. I got my master's there.
Where did you do your, what we call undergraduate work?
My undergraduate was in Egypt, but in between my undergraduate and my graduate degree, I also got some diplomas, non-degree diplomas. Most of them were thanks to my work then with the American Islamic Congress. And this is an organization based in Washington, D.C., and I was working in their office in Cairo.
Who are your mother and father?
That's a very interesting question. My mother and father are cousins, actually. My mother is a teacher, and now she's the headmistress of her school. My
Where?
father, in Cairo, Egypt.
Cairo,
We live
okay.
in Cairo up till today.
Okay.
My father was a military engineer, but unfortunately he died a long time
I'm
ago.
sorry.
Thank you.
Was your mother proud of your work?
Actually, no. My father was much encouraging and much, let's say, open-minded about what I'm doing. But my mother is like any traditional mother, very scared all the time. And actually, she wants me to get married and have babies and you know, make her a grandmother.
I understand.
That's what she cares for.
Okay. First of all, you're Muslim.
Yes.
And to what extent in the Egyptian world today, in the world of Cairo, is there a conflict between Muslims and Christians? And did that play any role in the Arab Spring?
For so long, actually, the Coptic Christians in Egypt were somehow suffering from so many discriminations that was practiced against them, not only from the side of Muslims or, let's say, from Islamists. When I say Islamists, I mean extremists, those who abuse religion to promote for violence and hatred towards anyone who's different, including sometimes other Muslims who are perhaps Shia or belong to other sects inside Islam. So, of course, Coptic Christians, despite their big number, they range between 10 to 15% of our population, but still they were discriminated against. The only difference between their situation before and now is that before 2011, before the Arab Spring started, they were very passive. They used always, or they were told always by their Pope, whenever they are facing, let's say, their houses being burned or churches closed or so, just go and pray and God will help you. But after 2011, the situation is different. They are now everywhere, participating all the time in everything, every protest, every political activity or whatever. So actually, this is somehow empowering them, and at least giving them a voice to complain about what they are seeing every day.
You were in the square, in the streets.
Yes.
When the Arab Spring broke out, what were you hoping to achieve?
First of all, the protests that started on January 25th, they were not, let's say, we did not know that it was going to be a revolution, in fact.
That's so honest.
But
Dalia.
of course, nobody expected this, you know, it's, don't believe whoever says so. We were there because we wanted to make a protest against police forces.
The police forces. Was it against Mubarak himself?
It didn't start. Of course, Mubarak was on our agenda, but this particular day was not against Mubarak, but against his police forces.
What was their behavior that you were protesting?
The police forces, they used to torture people and torture them in police stations, not to do their work. They were more protective of the regime rather than supporting the people. And actually a major incident that happened in the summer of 2010 that I think somehow motivated middle-class youth to start thinking about participating effectively in making a change. Because one, just a normal young man, 28 years old, was in one of the cyber cafes, and one day he found himself being like drawn out of the cyber cafe by two policemen and beaten to death in front of everyone in the street in Alexandria. this image of a young man, he's not a criminal, he's not a terrorist, he's not some bad person, he's just an average young man of Alexandria, was killed in this brutal way by policemen. So somehow this created some kind of rage. We wanted to take revenge for him and make sure this will not happen to us too one day.
Why would the police do that?
I think it is because they were not held accountable for so long for what they are doing. Also, they were given almost a green card by or a green light, let's say, by the government then to do whatever they want, as long as they are keeping the government and the president at that time protected from the bad young people who want to make social change happen. Also, I think it somehow needs to how police sector sees or respects human rights. They don't have any respect to human rights at all. And they think that the young people who are calling for social change either spies working with like foreign agencies or so, or like misguided people. They don't know what they are doing. They are being deceived by others. So that's why they were treating us so brutally. Actually, this was on the evening of the 25th of January, the 25th itself, when we started to see, we were joined in this protest. Actually, before that, when we used to go to protests, it's exactly the same people who join the protests all the time, the same activists. We know each other by face and by name, by
friends?
everything. Almost friends and colleagues and, you know. So this time, we were joined by people we've never seen before. Also, while we were in Tahrir, we got news that other squares in other cities are also filled with people. So it's something bigger than our expectations. Actually, and we were on the evening at that day, so actually a lot of time has passed and the people were supposed to go back home, but they did not. It is going on. At that moment, I felt like we are creating a momentum and it's not going to end here.
Mm-hmm. By the way, isn't it so exciting at that point?
It was.
In the most positive way possible.
Yes.
That here you are, a young person joined by people you don't know. The square is filling up, and there's a feeling you could be helping to really make, if not a revolution, a change. Yes?
Absolutely, yes. It was the most exciting moment in my life.
Okay. Ultimately, it leads to something. By the way, at any point, and again, I need you to be, and you are honest. I shouldn't even insult you. I know you're honest. To what extent, at any point, without Western inference, if we had stayed out of it, without a CNN camera or a CNN reporter, did people talk about democracy in this? Or was it more, I want to be free of oppression?
It was primarily like this. I want to be free of oppression. And then when we were gaining more floor, you know, on the protests, and it's not only one day or 1 week, but it is going on, and we are succeeding, and the government is really pressured, we started to bring up the democracy issue. And actually, but the democracy issue was brought up more after the whole protests has ended and Mubarak stepped down already. But amidst it, the main concern was, let's get rid of Mubarak because of the corruption and oppression and lack of freedom of expression and so on.
And to replace Mubarak with what?
We did not think about that, frankly speaking.
That's honest, isn't it?
Yeah, we did not think about that. Our main concern was just to bring down a dictator. And I think perhaps this is the mistake we made. Mm-hmm. We did not know, we learned how to bring down a dictator, but no one told us how to build up democracy.
Mm-hmm. The President of the United States at one point became supportive of the attempt to remove Mubarak.
That's true.
Did the United States do the right thing?
I think they did, and not only that. Actually, I studied this issue very well because it has to do with my thesis on how the interference of military or military siding with the people against Mubarak and the interference of the US in this somehow helped in accelerating, first of all, the process of change and making it happen peacefully without civil war or clashes like what we're seeing today in Syria, for example, and what we've seen in Libya as well. So the US here did not only it's not only limited to Obama coming out and saying to Mubarak, leave because your people want you to leave, but also when they called our military and said, don't shoot the people in the street, find a way to end it peacefully, but don't shoot them in the street. I think this has somehow saved a lot of lives from being lost, and also helped us create some kind of a positive relationship with our military that helped them, rather than siding with Mubarak, to side with the people.
Yes, the sense we had was the military was, in fact, instrumental in removing Mubarak. Is that fair to say?
Yes, of course. Yeah.
Okay. Does that mean, by the way, if I had been with you and I'd heard how you were referring to the United States and President Obama, he would have been spoken about when your friend spoke in a positive way?
Yes.
Okay. Has that changed at all?
It changed a lot now.
We'll talk about how that happened. Okay. Mubarak is out.
Yes.
And then there are elections.
Yes.
Okay. Mohamed Morsi wins the election.
Yes.
The way it's portrayed in the United States is that he is one of the leaders of the Muslim Brotherhood. Is that true?
Of course, he is, yeah.
As far as you could tell, did the majority of Egyptians who voted in that election, in fact, support the Muslim Brotherhood?
No. There is a misunderstanding here about what happened in the June 2012 elections that brought the Muslim Brotherhood in power. When we reached to the final stage, people were faced by two tough choices: either to vote for Morsi, who is a representative of the Muslim Brotherhood, and Morsi himself we knew very little about because he was not on the first row leaders, but the second row leaders who actually don't appear in media a lot. No one knows much about them. And another candidate who was the prime minister of Mubarak. So actually what we did is that we went to the less bad option.
You really voted against a Mubarak party member in essence, rather than for Morsi. It was a vote against the Mubarak guy.
Definitely. It's a protest vote. It's not a bro vote.
Okay.
It's more like that, you know.
Okay. You know, you've studied, on all kinds of levels you've studied. You've studied in Cairo, you've studied in the United States. You bring a sophistication that even most Americans don't have. But what I hear all the time is that it takes time for a culture, for a society that has not lived with democracy to really begin to understand how it works, to be committed to it, and to create an effective democracy. And when we even look at the early years of the United States of America, it took America time to really work out many of the kinks that were endemic to the initial constitutional framing of American democracy. And there are those who are saying America is still working it out. To what extent was democracy something which you feel now, in retrospect, is something that the average Egyptian person or your friends in Tahrir Square could in fact really embrace?
Yes, of course, absolutely. Our fight, actually, democracy is something needed by every human being on this globe, not only in Egypt, not only in the US. Our big dream is to be like the US in 10 years from now, and this is what we're working really hard to reach. But the point is that we were, because we brought Mubarak in 18 days, we thought that everything would happen with the same space, would happen just very fast like that. So we rushed the presidential elections, and thus we took this part of democracy that had only to deal with voting and just voting, while in fact democracy is much bigger than that. We are not looking only for only democracy, but for liberal democracy. In other words, the democracy that comes with all those amazing civil rights, human freedoms, respect for women's rights, rule of law, all the great things that you are having here in the US. So I think we did a mistake. And I agree, trying to return back and removing Morsi after he was elected, rather than waiting for him to end his term, was almost a step backwards, not a step forward.
Very honest.
But it is simply a step backwards because we realized that after taking, imagine like we, for example, had a goal at the end of this path to reach to liberal democracy. And then we started by presidential elections rather than starting by writing a constitution or making a parliament or so. And after taking a few steps, we realized we are on the wrong direction. And rather than waiting for another 4 or 30 years, you never know, to get rid of this, we decided no, it's better to stop now, take one step back, and then restart again on the right foot. So that's simply what we're doing now. We have cut 2 years of our lives actually by going back, but it's better than waiting for another 30 years or so. Mm-hmm. So what we're doing now is more hopeful because we have somehow corrected the mistake. The interim government now is given a roadmap, a clear vision to the future that starts with writing the constitution, and they are given a timeline to be committed to this. First, we will start writing a constitution, which is actually happening now while we're speaking. And in 1 month from now, we will have a referendum on the constitution draft. And then if the people said, okay, we're happy with the constitution, 2 months after that, parliamentary elections will be organized. When we have a parliament, 2 months later, we will have presidential elections. At that moment, I'm one of the Egyptian citizens who would not really care about who's going to be a president then. Because at that moment, I will be having a parliament who actually represents me and can speak on my behalf, and a constitution, a social contract that I can use to hold whoever is in power accountable if they abused their power or tried to take away my rights. And this is something we did not have when we had Morsi in power.
I like the fact that you use the word we a lot. Are you in politics now?
I was, but I think when I say we, I'm speaking somehow about all the young people who share the same dream with me in Egypt.
Okay, is this being driven in Egypt by young people?
Of course, yeah.
Well, you say of course. Does that mean that, again, I asked you already about your mother,
yeah.
But are you saying to me that in your mind, by the way, we should clarify, how old do you have to be before you're not young anymore?
40,
okay.
Maybe.
Are you saying that I would not see 40-year-olds and 50-year-olds engaged in the drive for democracy there?
They are not fully engaged, actually.
So is this also a generational thing for you?
It is, and also because Egypt and I think this rarely would happen in our history, demographically, this is the richest period in our history. Why? Because, or let's say modern history. I wouldn't speak about 7,000 years. I don't know what happened in them. But in the modern history, like it's the first time to have this huge population of young people. More than 60% of our population are under 35 years old. Mm-hmm. So you can imagine how this big population is full of enthusiasm and full of, mm-hmm. The need to make some change happen, to reshape the future for the country.
There's a journalist in America named Bret Stephens. He writes for the Wall Street Journal. And he points out that revolution after revolution after revolution starts with enormous idealism and the goal of freedom for everyone.
Of course.
And with the exception of the American Revolution, every single one of them morphs very quickly, evolves very quickly into a repressive, violent government. Mm. And whether it's the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, revolutions in South America, he goes one after the other after the other. And in some cases, in some ways you've said, there were some mistakes made early on in what the young people were trying to do in your revolution. And you tried to correct that by eliminating Morsi, and now there's an interim president, and you're going to have parliament, and then you're going to have elections. Are you worried that the same problems that have plagued other revolutions will still in some way affect yours?
we are under threat, of course, that we may do the same mistakes. But I think after our experience with Morsi and the Muslim Brotherhood, I am more confident now that the people are walking on the right track. And one recent statistic that actually comes from an opinion, public opinion survey we ran at my center that I think very much would explain to you how the people has become politically mature in a way that makes me more confident that we will not repeat the same mistake, was asking people, actually we were asking people about whether the identity of the president you want to see next. And given all what happened in Egypt recently, I was one of the people who actually thought that most of the people would vote for or would want a military president, especially, frankly speaking, El-Sisi, the Minister of Defense. Mm-hmm. But for my full surprise and shock, the results came as follows. 61% said we want a civilian president. 30% said we want civilian with military background. 9% said we want a military in service, or who is still serving now. So 61% of the people who adore El-Sisi already and adore the Minister of Defense and adore the military are thinking that, okay, what we love is one thing, but what we need is another thing. We know they are good as military and we love them, but we need a politician with a civilian background, not with a military background or so.
And the military and the civilian leader would in some way keep the military in check.
Yeah, no, not now, not in the near future.
Will the military have its own commander and do what it wants to do? In America, yes. The military is under the civilian president of the United States.
That's true.
It sounds to me like what you're saying is that the majority of Egyptian people want the same model. There should be a civilian leader to whom the military is responsible.
No, not that way. Okay, the military in Egypt, the status of the military now is that it is totally independent.
Correct.
Independent regarding
right.
Decision-making, finances, everything.
It is independent.
Of course.
Right.
And what the people are seeing now is that whenever they have a crisis, in more than one situation, the independent military acts like the savior, the one who steps in when things are very gloomy and very sad and you're not certain about the future and just gives you the solution. So actually most of the people already does not find it bad that the military remains independent as it is now, because this means they would always have a backup plan in case the government or the civilian government they will bring in makes some mistakes.
Do you agree with this?
Personally, no. I know it is wrong, of course.
Okay.
But for Egypt, we're still not a stable democracy as you are in the US. So I think we can one day, of course, want to do it the same way you're doing here by having democratic control on the armed forces. But I think this is not coming in the near future. Maybe in 15 or 20 years from now, when we are a stable, secure country with democracy in place, with institutions in place, and everything is going well, maybe at that time we'll start to advocate and call for putting the military under the supervision of the state.
You studied in America. How many years have you been in America?
Actually, I've been coming so often because also I worked with AIC for 7 years, and this kept me like coming here once every 3 months or so.
Does your close association with America in any way pose a problem for you? Are there people in Egypt who are in some way suspect of you because you do have a very sophisticated Western view of life?
Somehow, yes. And actually, it was used actually against me in my electoral campaign in 2011. I ran for parliament, and it was used extensively against me in a smearing campaign, like trying to say, well, this girl is not honest enough. She's not, patriotic enough because she travels to the US so often. She has Jewish friends. Actually, they brought photos for me from my Facebook page with some Jewish friends from Morocco and put them online, like as if it is a crime. Here, she's taking photos with Jewish people, but I think, well, I'm doing what I believe in.
Good for you.
Yeah,
Good for you. By the way, you should identify. I assume you're Sunni.
Yes.
Okay. And when Morsi represented the Muslim Brotherhood, he did not represent a perspective within Islam that you agree with. Is that correct?
Yes, because he represented the extreme side of Islam, not the moderate Islam that most of Egyptians embrace.
To what extent, by the way, if we were in Egypt, would we experience, I asked you about the tension between the Coptics, Christian Coptics, and Muslims. What about between the Muslim Brotherhood and the Sunni Muslim community in Egypt? Is there overt, visible, tangible tension between the two of you?
It was not the case before, but now it is. Because the people...
Before when?
Before the fall of Morsi and the Muslim Brotherhood.
So it didn't exist under Mubarak?
It didn't exist because actually the people did not know the reality of the Muslim Brotherhood. They were working from under the ground all the time. They represented the Salafis all the time as the most extreme, and they are the moderate. So the people somehow were deceived by this, and they believed that they are truly moderate. But after they showed us the real face when they came in power, people started to hate them.
Okay. So there is more tension now than there was before?
Of course.
Okay.
For example, on Sunday, we had our national celebration, like National Day, and the Muslim Brotherhood wanted to take advantage of the crowds in the street and find spots to make sit-ins again, to sit in again and occupy many squares. This time, it was not the police forces who went to evacuate them, but the people came out of their houses to evacuate the Muslim Brotherhood. And of course, this led to some clashes between those and those.
Very often you hear in America a complaint that there is not enough verbal reaction, there's not enough protest from within the moderate Muslim community reacting to the Islamic extremists. Is there something we don't understand, or do you feel that criticism is justified?
No, it's criticism is very, we worse criticism for this, that's true. But actually the thing is that most moderate Muslims are not organized like the extremists. The extremists are having their own hierarchy, system, their own sheikhs and imams. But most of the moderate Muslims are like, normal people just praying, having a relationship with God. They need to feel good with God. But at the same time, they are not trying to impose it on others. So they don't need to be in a hierarchy or in a structure. They find it something personal. So maybe that's why they don't think about being organized in a form that can fight against the extremists.
But you're in an organization.
Yes.
Your organization could take a stand.
Actually, when I was with the American Islamic Congress, somehow they were doing this. And actually, maybe for example, through the work they were doing, they were able to communicate and have even partnerships with organizations like AJC, the American Jewish Committee, which normally is not the case. It's like something expected to happen. But with Ibn Khaldun Center, which I'm working with now, we are almost like a think tank. We are mostly, a think tank, and what we care for more is studying the situation of minorities. But frankly speaking, I think we should think about maybe finding out how moderate Muslims could be organized in a positive way.
Is your Muslim religion important to you?
Yes, I think so. Yeah.
What does I think so mean? The reason I ask is, let me just give you the analogy, because the question might seem strange.
Yes.
Within the Jewish community, it is absolutely understandable when somebody says to another Jew, well, how important is Judaism to you? And the reason for that is the basic Jewish bond is not religion. The basic Jewish bond is family.
Yes.
And a sense of being part of a people. And this people, they live all over the world, and now many of them live in Israel, our ancestral homeland. But the reality is we feel a bond, an emotional bond with a Jew who goes to synagogue, doesn't go to synagogue. Is an observant religious Jew, is not an observant religious Jew. Believes in God, does not believe in God. In terms of how one, within the Jewish community, both defines and relates to another Jew, none of those things matter. You're a Jew, you're a Jew. You work it out for yourself. So when I say to you, from your perspective, how important is the Muslim religion to you, in terms of your whole being, how important is your religious identity in terms of shaping who you are as a person?
Well, that's a very good question, but I would put it in a different way. Like, my Egyptian identity comes first. I'm
Really?
Egyptian first and then Muslim second. So it's how I see myself, how I was brought up, and how I think is the right thing. I knew Egypt before I knew I was a Muslim, you know, so I think being Egyptian is the only thing I'm confident of this, in this world, you know.
Okay. So you have Jewish friends on Facebook. By the way, we should let our audience know, you're being basically sponsored here in America on this tour by the American Jewish Committee of New Jersey.
Yes.
And we should give credit to AJC New Jersey for making sure you're on Shalom TV, and I'm very grateful. And the American Jewish Committee does fabulous work, and I'm an enormous fan of their executive director, David Harris. So, but I do want to understand the extent to which, how do you end up having Jewish friends on Facebook yet?
On Facebook and in physical, real
Yes.
life as well,
Where
of course.
How does that come about?
Let's, for example, actually, one of the people who aided me very much in the beginning of my life when I was just trying to understand how to proceed with the work I'm doing in Egypt, how to get my voice heard worldwide, was a Jewish man from Boston. His name is Jesse Sage. He's not very much older than myself, actually, but he's only 3 years age between me and him. 3 years difference in age, I mean, between me and him. But he was very supportive. And he never cared what my religion is, and I never asked him what his religion is. This was an eye-opening experience for me. Then later I met another wonderful guy. His name is Daniel Pincus, who's on the AGC Access board. And Access is like the young people branch of the AGC board. And he was always very supportive also, and very believing very much in what I'm believing in, and like pushing me forward. So these are the examples that made me think, well, at the end of the day, we all belong to the same human family. And all the differences we're speaking about based on religion or other things are just things we're inventing and they are supposed actually to keep us strong, to keep the strong bond between all of us, not help us to differentiate between each other.
How do you feel about Israel?
Well, it's a country that exists next to the eastern border of Egypt.
Yes.
Yeah.
Does Israel have a right to exist from your perspective?
Definitely, of course. Why not?
Well, you know why people say. I mean, in the what's called the Arab world, in the Muslim world, there are many people who believe the state of Israel is a Zionist interloper, an inappropriate presence, and that ultimately all traces of Zionism and Judaism and Jewish should be kicked out of the Middle East. And they shouldn't be in Israel.
But I think this has to do with some kind of misunderstanding. For example, how you interpret the word Zionism in the West here is not like it is being interpreted in the Arab world. The word Zionism, for example, here, when you say it, it means like the right of Israel to exist, right? And I 100% agree with this. But in the Arab world, we were brought up, or we were told all the time in the media, in the school, everywhere, that Zionism means for the Arab world to be eliminated for the sake of Israel to be dominating the region. Of course, this is a complete different image. So that's why this misunderstanding is creating these prejudices between the two people.
Yes, forgive me, it's much worse than a misunderstanding. It's a lie. What you were taught was a lie. And I want you to say to anybody that you know in Egypt, no, that's a lie. That's a lie.
Definitely. But, it was also made for political reasons.
Yes.
When Nasser was there, he wanted to create an enemy in order to promote for his nationalistic point of view. So the best enemy to speak about is Israel. And he started discriminating not only against Israel, but also against the Jewish Egyptians. Egyptian Jews, actually, I met a wonderful Egyptian woman yesterday at the Jewish Center here who is Egyptian. And she left Egypt during Nasser time. And she was explaining to me how many times they went to the notary public and tried to sign this paper saying that they won't have the right to go back to Egypt and couldn't do it more than once. Can you believe this? I understand how painful it is. Actually, when she said this, I can't stop thinking about imagining or visualizing how horrible it is to be forced just to get out of your country simply because you are Jewish or you carry a certain religion. It's something really, really bad. And I wish she never had this experience, she or others. But, this is what happened. And I think what's happening in the Arab Spring now would definitely help end this. And that's why I think the Arab Spring is not only good for the Arab world, but also for Israel. Because it's helping us stop looking at the Palestinian-Israeli conflict as if it is the end of the world, or as if it is the thing that will never be solved without having dictators in the region. Because our dictators all the time used to use this to distract the people from the real problems. Whenever, let's say, Mubarak or Morsi or whoever dictator wanted to claim a heroic role that they actually never had, they just bring up the Palestinian-Israeli issue. Whenever they want to feel secure or something in front of their people, or sometimes in front of the US, they just bring the Palestinian-Israeli issue without really thinking about a solution. I don't see the two-state solution something so impossible, by the way. It's so possible, except that we had big obstacles that were making it or were stopping it from happening, Now I see the chances for solving the Palestinian-Israeli conflict is much more possible. The fact that Israel can be seen simply as just another country in the region like the rest of the countries in the region is more possible now, especially given the fact that what's happening online. Those conversations on social media, Facebook and Twitter, between Israeli youth and Arab youth, they are happening every day. You can go there and you follow them and you will be really surprised how it is easy. A couple of weeks ago, we had this in our newspaper, like a headline, saying that Israeli military and Egyptian military are cooperating for operations in Sinai. And the people were very tolerant with this headline. No one criticized this. On the contrary, we were happy that finally they are cooperating. So I think while the Arab Spring is reshaping or let's speak about Egypt, while we are trying to reshape the future of Egypt, we are also reshaping the future of the Middle East. Mm-hmm. And I am sure the Middle East that will come next is more accommodating, more inclusive than the Middle East we've always had.
Is there serious anti-Semitism still within the Egyptian people?
There are still, of course, but on certain, let's say in the generations that is above.
It's also generational?
Of course, yeah. Because in the younger generation, we did not go through all the war and hatred, one war after another, and all the conspiracies that were happening before. So we don't somehow feel like we need to inherit this heritage of hate anymore. At the same time, as I told you, we're more future-oriented. We care more about the future, how to coexist together in the future. More pragmatic, if you can say, more than thinking about the issue from an emotional point of view.
Mm. Have you ever been to Israel?
No, actually, but I always wanted to. But
why do you think you haven't been?
Because this stamp, if I got a stamp on my passport, I would be always treated as a spy in my country.
In other words, you would be in some way risking something yourself if you went to Israel. And just think about that with me for a moment. I want to understand it better. You know, Sadat and Begin make peace.
Yes.
It's been called in the Jewish world a cold peace.
Yeah.
And it's cold because when in the euphoria, in the joy of when the peace treaty was first signed, there was a hope there would be an exchange of ambassadors and that tourism would flourish for both countries. Egyptians would come to visit Israel and Israelis would come and visit Egypt. And there's a feeling within the Jewish world that that hasn't happened because Egypt doesn't want it to happen. And what you're saying is, even though it's generational, there is enough institutional obstacles of anti-Semitism or anti-Zionist or anti-Israel feeling that even though you would love to go to Israel, at the moment it's not pragmatically wise for you, correct?
That's right, yeah.
Yes.
Of course, it's not going to end just like that. It would take some time, especially that those laws that somehow prevent people from going to Israel or so are still there since Nasser time. And even when Sadat made this peace treaty with Israel, actually they remained there. And some of the leftists and socialists who belonged to the Nasser time and Nasserists, let's say, they thought that by stressing those laws and forcing the concept of that Zionism, for example, is about eliminating Arabs or killing Muslims or so, they kept promoting this in order to tease Sadat, not actually. So it's a heritage of beliefs and actions that would be eliminated one after the other. But it's a process.
It will take time,
take
won't
time.
it? Yes.
Of course.
I asked you about your mother before. Would your mother be happy if you went to Israel?
I didn't ask her, but
you know her well enough.
I don't think she would mind, by the way.
This would not upset her. She doesn't want you, she would never say,
No.
oh, you can't go to the Jewish Israel.
No, in this regard, she's more open-minded in respect with religions more than that.
Okay.
It's
in your mind, God is Allah?
yes, God is God.
God is God.
The one God.
It's one God, okay. And you call the one God Allah.
Yes, in Islam, yes, it
Okay.
is. Yeah.
Does Allah love Jews?
Of course.
Why are there so many in the Muslim tradition who say he doesn't? That I shouldn't say he. That Allah doesn't. Why
Because
is
they
that?
don't. First of all, they are fanatics. They don't understand. They are fascist somehow. They think they are the best people in the world and everyone else. Actually, they say the same thing about even Shia Muslims too. Mm-hmm. They say the same thing about Copts. They say the same thing about everyone. So those people actually doesn't count on Islam, and you cannot count them on Islam or say they are Muslims. They are just some distorted version of human beings that should not needs a lot of change in their minds.
Okay, so there are many people watching right now. They're watching you. I think they're in love with you on Shalom TV.
Thank you.
And they're both Jews and Christians and Muslims. We get emails from Muslims as well. I'm very proud of that fact. But I want you to talk right now to those who are Jewish who are watching. There are Jews who are concerned that everything that's happened in Egypt, the instability, what looks like chaos to the American,
Yes.
is in some way threatening the Egyptian-Israeli stability. What would you say to them? To what extent is there reason to be concerned? To what extent do you feel there's no reason to be concerned?
Okay, of course what's happening in Egypt is very tough, definitely. But it's not to the extent that it would threaten something that is very big like the Israeli-Egyptian relations. Because again, now we're looking at the Israeli-Egyptian relations from a very narrow lens. It's not about, or let's say the relation between the Jewish people and the Egyptian people goes very backwards. You have us in your Bible, actually. And we have you in our history from the time of pharaohs. So it's not a new relationship. Somehow we are connected. At the end of let's say, the cluster of the family, We are connected somewhere. If you look at this, you will realize that we have gone through a lot of difficulties together as two peoples, and we ended up living neighbors next to each other. What we're going through right now in the Middle East is one of those episodes, another difficulty that we will get over, and hopefully we will be telling stories about it later on and how we get over.
That would be lovely. To what extent, if Americans are watching, should there be a concern within the American population that the United States is doing something wrong by giving so much foreign aid in dollars to the military and to Egypt in general? What would you like Americans to feel about American foreign aid to Egypt?
I want Americans to feel very proud about the fact that America is giving aid to Egypt, especially right now, and to pressure the government to continue giving the full aid without suspending anything, because we are in a very important phase. And rather than actually thinking about or fearing from the military, who has no interest in being in politics, by the way, because it's in their best interest to remain where they are, so independent and so happy and so everything, is they should rather focus on, and the US administration should rather focus on, first of all, following up with the roadmap, making sure we are keeping up with it and we will finish it on the given timeline. And at the same time, to help Egypt apply what we call transitional justice, which means that everyone who did wrong to the Egyptian people in the past, either from Mubarak regime or from Morsi regime, should come to trial and should be held accountable for what they did. And then after this is being happened, laws should be made to make sure that those violations will not be repeated again under any circumstances. And the third step will be bringing people together from different factions, including even the Muslim Brotherhood and everyone, and sit together and reconcile to make sure the country will go on in the right direction. Here you had so many years to become America. I think we are in this phase now. So think about this and think how to accelerate it so you help us be better.
I'm glad I gave you the chance to speak to it. I want you to speak to one more issue.
Sure.
And we didn't touch upon this at all so far. We talked a lot about politics. But in terms of the social realities of the world you live in, you're also a woman. And we understand that it's hard to be a woman in Muslim society in general. I don't know the extent to which all the facts we're told are true. And that it's hard in Egypt. Speak for one moment about what it is to be a woman in Egypt and in the Muslim world.
It's very tough. It's very tough, actually, because not only because of religion and how it is being abused. Sharia law is being abused to discriminate against women in most of the time, but also because of the mindset of the people in my world. They keep actually looking at women's rights and women as not a priority, as not something that we should think of now. For example, immediately before I fly to here on Thursday, I was attending a hearing with representatives of civil society with the Constitution Committee. So actually in this hearing we spent hours discussing whether to write in the Constitution that men and women are equal and then full stop, or men and women are equal if it does not contradict Sharia. So, and this time we're discussing this with a secular committee. They are not Islamists, they are not fanatics, they are not anything. So it's a mindset. It's very difficult, but the women are still fighting. The women are still trying to improve themselves, and hopefully one day we will make it.
You will definitely make it. I want you to know, Dalia, you're a spectacular person. You know, I don't know exactly your age, but you could be my daughter, and I would be so proud if you were my daughter.
Thanks so
and
much.
My guess is that, again, whether your mother agrees with everything you do or does not, she must be very, very proud of you.
Thank you.
I want you to know that I wish you every success in the world. I wish you a success in terms of the struggle that you are helping your people achieve. And there were many wonderful Americans who made revolution after revolution possible, including the Civil Rights Revolution.
Thank
and you know the Jewish people were in the forefront of that. And I want you to be as successful as possible in the idealistic revolution that you are trying to accomplish, and I hope that no one ever gets in your way or turns it in an evil way. I believe that you have the strength to really do extraordinary work. It has been a privilege to meet you, and you will always have a home here.
Sure, thank you. It's definitely my pleasure.
In Hebrew, it's called Tu v'hatzlacha, all goodness and success to you.
Toda.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
My conversation with Dalia Ziada, Executive Director of the Ibn Khaldun Center for Development Studies in Cairo, an extraordinary human being, and it was a pleasure and a privilege to have her on. And my thanks to the AJC of New Jersey, the American Jewish Committee of New Jersey, and to Naomi Vilko, who was a dear member of the Shalom TV Board of Directors, who made sure that we got to meet Dalia. Thank you, Naomi. Wonderful. And I wish you all the best.
Thank you. I wish the same to you.
Thank you. If you would all have thoughts of your own, please, I would love to hear them. Email me, write me, post on our Facebook wall, tweet me. I would love to hear your reactions to the things that Dalia's had to say. And if you want to be in touch with Dalia yourself, you can always email me, and I will forward your comments on to her. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. L'chaim, my friends, to life.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support Shalom TV with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the Shalom TV website homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to GEM, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive on DVD with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.
L'chaim is a presentation of Jewish Education in Media.